16 seconds. That's all it took to set the entire basketball world on fire. A game-ending play involving Angel Reese sent shockwaves through the WNBA, and before the final buzzer could even echo through the arena, the debates were already exploding across every platform, every comment section, every sports talk show in the country. But here's the thing. The play itself wasn't even the most shocking part of what happened next, because what came after, that's where it got really interesting. A WNBA legend stepped forward and said something so direct, so undeniable, that the old guard in the league didn't know whether to argue back or go completely quiet. And the fact that she said it at all, on national television in front of millions, tells you everything about just how serious this situation has become. This wasn't a random hot take from some outsider with a microphone. This was one of the most decorated players in the history of women's basketball, drawing a line in the sand and daring everyone to cross it. So what exactly did she say? Why is it making waves? And what does it mean for the future of the WNBA? Stick around, because this story goes much deeper than one game-ending play and one viral clip. This is about a league at war with itself and one woman who might have just forced it to look in the mirror. Before we even get to Candace Parker's comments, you need to understand the environment she was walking into, because this wasn't a calm, peaceful off-season where everyone showed up refreshed and ready to compete. This was a league that limped into the new season, dragging the weight of everything that went wrong the year before. The cheap shots, the double standards, the media narratives that had nothing to do with basketball, and the simmering resentment that had been building since the moment Caitlin Clark stepped foot on a professional court. And a lot of people thought a new season would reset things. Fresh start, new games, everybody moves on. That's not what happened. If anything, the animosity got louder, the jealousy got more obvious, the double standards became harder and harder to explain away. It was like someone turned up the volume on everything that was already broken, and the league just kept pretending the speakers weren't blowing out. Here's what's wild about all of it. The very thing that was causing all this tension, Caitlin Clark's presence in the league, was the very thing saving it financially. Every number, every stat, every metric you could possibly point to was screaming the same message, and the league couldn't bring itself to just say it plainly. That's the powder keg Candace Parker walked into, and she lit the match anyway. There's a reason Candace Parker's name carries weight in every conversation about women's basketball. 2-time league MVP, 2 Olympic gold medals, 3 WNBA championships. When she talks, people listen, and more importantly, people know she's earned the right to say whatever she wants about this league. She built it alongside the legends who came before her, and she's watched the next generation come up in a way that she genuinely understands better than most. So when she sat down with Stephen A. Smith on First Take, one of the highest profile platforms in sports media, and started talking about Caitlin Clark, the room got very quiet very fast. Because this wasn't some outside commentator throwing opinions around. This was a Hall of Fame caliber player looking directly into the camera and saying the thing that a lot of people in the league had been desperately trying to avoid. She said it plainly. She wasn't resentful, she wasn't bitter, she wasn't sitting around being salty that the spotlight had shifted. And then she went further. She explained exactly why that kind of thinking is not only pointless, it's actively destructive for everyone involved. You could almost hear the old guard collectively flinch. Stephen A. Smith didn't let her off easy either. This wasn't a puff piece. He pushed, he challenged, and he asked the kinds of questions that made people uncomfortable, including directly calling out the jealousy that has been swirling around Caitlin Clark since day one. And Candace didn't dodge a single one of them. She leaned in. She gave the kind of measured, intelligent, basketball-first answers that the league desperately needed someone to give on a stage that big. And what happened next would prove that her words hit exactly as they were supposed to.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room that somehow keeps getting ignored no matter how large it grows. The numbers. The actual, verifiable, impossible to argue with numbers that tell you everything you need to know about what Caitlin Clark means to the WNBA right now. A preseason exhibition game against Brazil. Not a playoff game, not a finals matchup. A preseason game that pulled in 1.3 million viewers. Think about that for a second. That single warm-up game outperformed the viewership of most regular season games that have been played in recent years. It wasn't even a real game, and people showed up in numbers that most sports leagues would kill for on their biggest nights. Then the regular season started. The first game of the year against the Sky became the most-watched WNBA regular season game in 25 years, with an average of 2.7 million viewers tuning in. That's not a spike. That's not a fluke. That's a seismic shift in who is paying attention to women's basketball, and why. Then came the matchup against the Liberty, and that number climbed again, 3.3 million people watching, which happened to be the highest peak viewership of any game ever on CBS. Ever. Not just this season, ever. And merchandise, flying off shelves. Ticket prices, through the roof, for fever games specifically. Arena sizes, teams were literally moving to bigger venues just to accommodate the demand whenever the fever came to town. That's not normal. That's historic. And every single one of those numbers pointed directly at one reason. Then she got hurt, and the market responded instantly in a way that should have made every single person in that league front office sit down and have a very serious conversation. Ticket prices for fever games without Caitlin Clark dropped by 300%. Not 30, not 300%. Hades, as one analyst put it, is where those prices went. The rest of the league felt it too. Ratings dipped, interest cooled, and suddenly the momentum that had been building all season started to stall. You'd think numbers like that would be impossible to argue against. You'd think a 300% price drop the moment your biggest draw goes down would be the kind of cold water that forces even the most stubborn voices in the room to reckon with reality. But the league kept steering the conversation elsewhere, and that decision was about to cost them. Here's where things get genuinely frustrating, because this isn't just about jealous players or bitter commentators. This goes straight to the top of the organization. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert wrote a piece for the Harvard Business Review, one of the most prestigious business publications in the world, about the WNBA's growth and what was driving it. And in that piece, she managed to give credit to just about every single entity involved in the league's success. Front office strategy? Gotta mention. Marketing teams? Absolutely acknowledged. Players across the league? Praised. Coaches? Recognized. The infrastructure, the investment, the years of work that went into building the league to this point, all of it got its moment in the piece. Caitlin Clark? Almost nothing. A dot more than a McDonald's fountain soda, as one commentator put it. Her influence was so significantly minimized in the piece that it almost felt intentional. And given what the numbers showed, given what the ticket prices showed, given what the ratings showed, maybe it was. That piece told you more about the internal politics of the WNBA than any press conference ever could. Because when you write an entire analysis of your league's most explosive growth period, and you go out of your way not to credit the one player who everyone, including your own data, says is the primary engine of that growth, that's not an oversight. That's a choice. And it's a choice that players, fans, and now legends like Candace Parker are increasingly refusing to accept quietly. The new season barely had time to breathe before the controversy machine killed into full gear, and almost none of it had anything to do with basketball. Game 1 against the Sky, one of the most anticipated opening matchups in recent WNBA history, carrying enormous expectations, enormous viewership, and enormous opportunity for the league to celebrate what it had built.
Instead, the league opened an investigation into alleged hate speech from fans in the arena. Reports spread, headlines were written. The story that should have been about a historic debut for a record-breaking player turned into a debate about fan conduct, arena safety, and racial tensions. And here's the part that matters. The evidence turned out to be insufficient. The story, as it had been framed online and picked up by media, didn't hold up. It was, by multiple accounts, a rumor that got amplified until it became treated as fact. But by then, the damage was done. The headlines had been stolen. The moment had been swallowed. And once again, Caitlin Clark and her supporters were pulled into a narrative that had nothing to do with what actually happened on the court. What made it worse was the contrast.
Because while the league was busy investigating rumors about fan behavior, very real threats were being directed at Fever players. Not subtle jabs, not critical tweets, actual documented threats. Photos of players with bullseyes drawn on them. Messages that said things like, "It's on site when I see you." The kind of language that goes well beyond trash talk and crosses into territory that any organization claiming to care about its players' safety should have responded to immediately and loudly. The league said nothing. No statement, no defense, no support for the players facing those threats. Just silence. The same silence that kept showing up every time something genuinely ugly happened on or around Caitlin Clark and her teammates. And that silence was starting to say everything. It didn't stop there. On social media, a new narrative emerged, suggesting that Caitlin Clark was somehow using her assistant coach's baby as a prop for publicity. That's the level of conversation that was happening. Not basketball analysis, not legitimate criticism. Conspiracy replacing critique, and the league still nowhere to be found when it came to defending its players from it. For a long time, the J word was treated like something you couldn't just say out loud in WNBA circles. You could hint at it, you could describe its symptoms, you could watch it play out in real time, and everyone around you could clearly see it too. But actually naming it, on camera, in plain language, that took a particular kind of courage that very few people in and around the league were willing to show. Stephen A. Smith was one of the few. He said jealousy. He said it clearly, he said it repeatedly, and he pushed back on every attempt to reframe it as something else. And when he gave Nafisa Collier a platform on First Take to voice her frustrations about Caitlin receiving more nationally broadcast games, he didn't let the conversation stay comfortable. He pushed for real answers, not talking points. Because the frustration some players expressed about broadcast scheduling wasn't just a business concern, it was a window into exactly the kind of thinking that was holding the league back. Caitlin Clark's games were getting national broadcast slots because 3.3 million people watched her play. That's not politics, that's not favoritism, that's television networks responding to audience demand in the most basic, straightforward way possible. If your game is drawing those numbers, you get the prime slot. That's how it works in every other sport on the planet. And yet, instead of looking at those numbers and thinking about how to grow their own profile, certain voices in the league were spending energy resenting the player generating them. That resentment had been running like a current underneath everything all season, visible in the physicality on the court, audible in the coded language used in interviews, readable between the lines of every statement that went out of its way to not say Caitlin Clark's name. Lisa Leslie saw it. She called it out directly and basically dropped the entire conversation into perspective with one comparison: Michael Jordan. When Jordan came along, the NBA didn't resent his popularity or tried to distribute credit to everyone else on the roster. They built around him, they marketed around him, they let his star power lift every boat in the harbor, and the result was a generation of growth that the league is still benefiting from decades later. The template exists, it's been proven. The WNBA just had to be willing to follow it. Now here's where Candace Parker's comments become truly significant, not just as a celebrity opinion, but as a philosophical statement about what sports legacy actually means. Because what she said wasn't just about Caitlin Clark, it was about every player who ever worked to build something bigger than themselves.
She said she gets asked all the time whether she resents Caitlin Clark. Let that sink in for a moment. One of the most accomplished athletes in the history of the WNBA, a woman who has done more for the league than almost anyone alive, is being asked regularly whether she's jealous of a second-year player. And the fact that that question is being asked so frequently reveals more about the culture inside the league than any expose ever could. But Candace's answer? That's where it gets good. She said it plainly. Her job was to leave the game better than she found it. She pointed to Cheryl Miller, the pioneer who never had a league to play in professionally, who could have spent her career bitter about the timing, but instead became a mentor, showed up courtside cheering for the next generation, and poured everything she had into making sure the women who came after her had more than she did. That's the standard. That's what real legacy looks like. And Candace was holding it up like a mirror in front of everyone in the league who had been spending their energy going the opposite direction. She went further. She made the MJ comparison herself, and it was devastating in the best possible way. She pointed out that Dominique Wilkins doesn't resent Michael Jordan. Dr. J isn't bitter that Jordan came along and grew the game into something no one had ever imagined. The legends who built the foundation understand that the point was never to be the last great player. It was to build something strong enough to produce the next one. Bird and Magic built it for Jordan. Jordan built it for Kobe and Shaq. Kobe and Shaq built it for LeBron. LeBron is building it for Luka and SGA right now. That's how generational greatness works. You pass the torch, you don't try to blow it out. And then she said something that cut right to the heart of it. She wasn't there pointing fingers or naming names, but her message was unmistakable. You don't have to downplay Caitlin Clark to be relevant. You don't have to act like her success is a fluke, or pretend the numbers aren't real, or drag racial politics into a conversation about basketball ratings. You support her, because when she wins, the league wins, the players win, the next generation wins, and every woman who ever picked up a basketball wins alongside her. Simple, logical, obvious, really. And yet somehow, in 2025, it needed to be said out loud on national television by a Hall of Famer to get through to people. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in all of this, and it's actually one of the most encouraging data points of the entire season. When Caitlin Clark went down with her injury, a lot of people, including some inside the league who probably shouldn't have been happy about it, assumed the Fever would fade back into irrelevance. No star, no story, no reason to tune in. That's not what happened. The Indiana Fever played the Connecticut Sun on a Friday night without Caitlin Clark on the court. They drew 851,000 viewers. That's not a Caitlin Clark number. But here's the point everyone seems to be missing. It was the most watched WNBA game on ION that entire season, without their franchise player. Without the person every network exec was riding their broadcast strategy around. The Fever still drew. And that means something enormous if you're paying attention. It means the fan base that Clark built isn't just a one-person cult following that disappears the moment she's unavailable. It's a genuine, growing, invested audience that is connected with the team, with the city, with the brand that has been built around Indiana basketball. Those fans showed up because they care, and they care because Caitlin Clark made them care first. That's what the Caitlin Clark effect actually looks like in its full form. It's not just the 3.3 million people watching her score. It's the 851,000 people who stuck around even when she couldn't play, because she had already done the work of making them fans. That kind of audience development doesn't happen overnight. It takes a singular talent doing something that resonates deeply enough to convert casual viewers into committed supporters. The league built properly around this moment would recognize that number for what it is, proof of concept, the first stage of something that could eventually spread from Indiana to the entire WNBA if the right decisions get made right now. But that requires the league to lean in, not pull back, to embrace what's happening instead of quietly hoping nobody notices who's responsible for it.
Let's be very clear about something that the WNBA's front office, certain players, and some media figures seem determined to avoid confronting directly. The leverage they think they have going into the next collective bargaining agreement, it depends almost entirely on the continued health and presence of Caitlin Clark. There's been talk about the new CBA, about what players can demand, about the financial future of the league, and the improved deals that are supposedly coming. And all of that optimism is built on the foundation of record ratings, packed arenas, and surging interest that everyone in this conversation knows is being driven primarily by one player. The moment she went down with that injury, ticket prices crashed 300%. Viewership softened. The casual fan who had just discovered the WNBA through Clark's highlight packages went back to waiting. And the window of leverage that people had been counting on suddenly looked a lot narrower than it had the week before. One severe injury. That's how fragile this moment is right now. Not because the league itself is weak, not because the other players aren't talented, they absolutely are, but because the mainstream attention that makes those CBA numbers possible is still disproportionately tied to one athlete's ability to suit up on game night. That's a vulnerability, not a strength, and pretending otherwise isn't bravery, it's denial with expensive consequences. Candace Parker's comments landed with weight because they were right. But comments alone don't fix structural problems, and the WNBA has some deeply structural problems it needs to address if it's going to make good on the potential this moment represents. First, and most urgently, the officiating. The inconsistency on the court, the fouls that get called on some players and mysteriously don't get called when the situation is reversed, the physicality that gets permitted when Caitlin Clark is the one absorbing it, that has to change. You cannot build a sustainable star around someone and then allow that star to get targeted with impunity every time she touches the ball. It's bad for her health, it's bad for the product, and it sends a message to every fan watching that the league doesn't actually value what they showed up to see. Second, the league needs to defend its players. All of them, but especially the ones receiving credible threats. When photos of players have bullseyes drawn on them and messages circulate saying it's on site, that's not a Twitter problem. That's a security and communications failure of an organization that claims to stand for its athletes. The silence in response to those threats was inexcusable, and it will continue to erode trust from both players and the fans who care about them. And third, and this is the one that requires the most honest self-reflection, stop deflecting credit. Stop writing articles and giving interviews that credit everything except the obvious. Stop pretending the growth is distributed evenly when the data shows it isn't. Not because Caitlin Clark needs the ego boost, she doesn't seem to require that kind of validation, but because truthful acknowledgement of what's driving success is the only foundation on which you can build a real, lasting strategy. You can't replicate something you refuse to acknowledge. The WNBA is at its most important crossroads right now. Bigger than the league's founding, bigger than any championship run, bigger than any previous viewership record. This is the moment that either launches women's basketball into a generation of mainstream relevance, or the moment that gets written about in 10 years as the opportunity a league was too consumed by internal politics to capitalize on. There's something almost poetic and deeply sad happening simultaneously in the WNBA right now. The league is experiencing its greatest success, and it's also in some ways working harder than ever to undermine that success through internal dysfunction that has nothing to do with basketball. Caitlin Clark hasn't done anything to deserve the animosity directed at her. She hasn't been arrogant. She hasn't dismissed the players who came before her. She's praised them publicly, repeatedly, and specifically. She hasn't manufactured conflict with teammates or opponents. She's shown up, played hard, broken records, and done everything a franchise player is supposed to do. She shouts out her teammates, acknowledges the legends who built the platform she's playing on, and by every visible measure carries herself with a level of professionalism and humility that most athletes twice her age haven't figured out. The hostility she's faced, the hard fouls, the coded media commentary, the league's silence when she needed support, the relentless attempts to redistribute her credit to other people, none of it was earned. And more importantly, none of it has slowed her down. If anything, it's made her supporters more passionate, more loyal, and more vocal. Every time someone tries to cut her down, the audience defending her grows larger. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when a genuinely talented, genuinely likable athlete gets treated unfairly in plain sight of millions of people watching. The pushback becomes part of the story. And the story becomes bigger than any single game, any single play, any single controversial moment. 16 seconds started this particular news cycle, but the conversation it opened up, That's been building for 2 years. And Candace Parker, with her measured words and her Hall of Fame credibility, may have just given it the most powerful voice it's had yet. So here's where we land. Not with a clean resolution, because there isn't one yet. Not with a happy ending, because we're still very much in the middle of the story. But with a question that every person who cares about the WNBA, players, coaches, executives, fans, needs to sit with seriously. Will the league learn? Will it look at everything that has happened over these 2 seasons, the record ratings, the crash ticket prices, the investigated rumors, the real threats that went unaddressed, the commissioner's piece that didn't say the name that mattered most, the legends who had to step forward and say things the league itself should have been saying? Will it look at all of that and decide to course correct? Or will the internal politics, the resentment, the inability to simply say, this person has done something extraordinary for our sport and we are grateful, prove to be the thing that caps the ceiling on everything this moment could have been? The Caitlin Clark era in the WNBA is the most significant thing to happen to women's basketball in a generation. Candace Parker knows it, Lisa Leslie knows it, Stephen A. Smith knows it. The 3.3 million people who tuned in to watch her play know it. The 851,000 people who watched The Fever, even without her, know it. The only ones who seem to be struggling with it are the people inside the building who should be celebrating the loudest. 16 seconds changed a game, but the next few years, those will change the league, for better or for worse, depending entirely on whether the people running it finally decide to get out of their own way.